So it's becoming more and more obvious as we go along here that the Switch is pretty easy to develop for. We've had several developers come out and say this on their own. And then, of course, we see the results from things like Snake Pass being ported in a week and then developed on, and then it comes out and it's very similar to the PS4 and the Xbox One version in terms of visuals and performance. We see Lego City Undercover come out and runs at 1080p and looks very similar to the PS4 and the Xbox One. Some differences in frame rate. For example, the PS4 and the Xbox One run at 60 frames in certain on-foot missions, but when you get out in the open world, they all run at 30 frames. And in fact, there were a couple times with the Switch version where it was rendering things better than the PS4. So there are some interesting things going on with the Switch right now. And while that is not an Unreal Engine 4 game, it's a custom engine they developed, it's still very interesting to see that what the Switch is doing with the tool set that NVIDIA has provided for that chip. But some interesting news has come out now from a representative from Epic Games Japan, and of course Epic Games owns Unreal, they develop it, and they are the ones who have developed Unreal Engine 4 and made it extremely accessible in partnership with Nintendo and NVIDIA, of course, to be completely compatible with the Switch and make things just generally easier on developers. So this representative essentially came out and said, look, at least 20 Unreal Engine 4 games in Japan right now are being developed for the Switch, and that kind of caught some people off guard that many were in development right now. Like, none that were, like, being planned. They're being made right now. And they said they've been made for a little while now, and they're just continuing progress, and the Switch is added to it, or was the main focus at some point. I assume most of the Unreal Engine 4 games are probably games that are third-party, that are being built for other systems as well, mostly because Unreal Engine 4 is something that you would use to help you port games. But in this case, I do know there are games like Shin Megami that we already know that is, as far as we can tell right now, exclusive to the Switch. And this was in a quote to Automaton by the Epic Games Japan representative. He said, "Unfortunately, there were not any Unreal Engine titles at launch, but in late May, Snake Pass, which was one of the titles playable at GDC, launched in America and Europe, and at the Nintendo Switch presentation, there were titles such as Shin Megami Tensei. In Japan, there are about 20 titles being developed that use Unreal Engine, so I think that they'll be announced gradually from here on. These are titles that use Unreal Engine for the Switch and are being made in Japan. There may even be more, and now we're gradually moving forward with Switch support for the free version of Unreal Engine 4. That way, as long as you have a Switch development license, you'll be able to develop for Switch even with the free version." And that's something to really take note of. That's very interesting. As long as you have a license with Nintendo to develop for that system, you technically can start development right away with Unreal Engine by downloading the free version. They were adding a lot of support for the Switch to be scalable with the free version, and now it looks like that's what they're doing. They're adding tools to it so that you can use that. People were saying there was like an export on Switch. I don't think it's that easy. I think you still have to do a lot of fine-tuning. But it's obviously easier because it's using the same engine across the board. Let's say you're developing for the PS4 like they were with Snake Pass. Here comes the Switch. You move it over, you change some settings, you do some refinement work, and all of a sudden, it's running the same game overall. Of course, the visuals may be a little different. Maybe the resolution's smaller or something to help it. But overall, it's the same game. Now, I know you may be asking yourself, John, why does this matter? What games are even out there for the Unreal Engine 4 right now that we would care about, especially ones out of Japan that are using that engine? Well, buckle up. Let me tell you a couple here that are still coming out that I think you might be interested in. So here we go. You have games like Final Fantasy VII Remake, the one that people are clamoring over right now. That is an Unreal Engine 4 game. Tekken 7. We already know about Shin Megami Tensei and Bloodstained, both of which. Shenmue 3, while I think that will stay with PlayStation because they, of course, funded most of it, that one is also on Unreal Engine 4. And then you also have games like Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite that Capcom is doing. Remember, Capcom came to them and said, hey, you need to put more RAM in this thing so we can do things like bring Resident Evil over. What if they'd be interested in doing Marvel vs. Capcom also? That might be interesting. And then, of course, you have the big one, Kingdom Hearts 3. Now, some of those, like I said, like Shenmue, I can pretty much write off as not coming over because that, from what I can tell, was pretty much funded by Sony in an effort to keep it on their system as basically a faux exclusive that they're not directly designing. But games like Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy, those are interesting because Square is not adverse to putting games on the Switch. They've talked about things like, of course, Secret of Mana Collection. That one is definitely happening. And I think because they are a Japanese company, they are much more interested in something like the Switch than like the Xbox, and they are already putting games on the Xbox. Kingdom Hearts is going to it, of course, and I keep hearing rumors that Final Fantasy is a timed exclusive for the PS4, this Final Fantasy VII Remake, and at this point, I do think if these are all running Unreal Engine 4, there's at least a small sliver of hope that if it's not being funded directly by the company like Sony or Microsoft, it could come to the Switch, mostly because it's just possible. I will say, I do think at E3, one of the games on this list is going to be announced for the Switch. I don't know which one, but I think one of them. And of course, in a perfect world, they would go on stage and they would play the Kingdom Hearts music, and there'd be Sora on screen with, of course, Donald, Mickey, and Goofy, and they would say, hey, guess what? Kingdom Hearts 3 coming to the Switch. And hopefully it's coming out this year. That's the other big announcement. Tell us it's coming out this year. Anyway, but yeah, coming to the Switch. So at that point, I had to ask myself, well, if the same game is going to be on the Switch as it would on the PS4 or the Xbox One, and I don't necessarily care too much about 4K right now, why wouldn't I get it on the Switch if it's providing the same functionality? And that, I think, is what a lot of people are going to ask themselves. If the same game runs on both, why wouldn't I get it on the system that essentially can go with me wherever I want? If I don't want to play it on the TV, or I can't take the TV up at the time for other reasons, maybe your spouse or somebody is hogging the TV for Netflix or something, you could just play it on the couch or play it in bed or wherever. So at that point, I have to tell myself the convenience of the Switch becomes very, very enticing, especially if the same games are on both. I think when the system first got announced, a lot of people were saying, oh, obviously the same games aren't going to run on both, right? Well, here's Snake Pass, here's Lego City Undercover. So what happens if a big game like Call of Duty shows up on it? What happens if a big game like Kingdom Hearts shows up on it? Of course, this is pure speculation, but I have to think at that point I'm buying it on the Switch, right? Unless of course, you have a 4K TV, you want that 4K experience. I get that. That makes sense. But if you don't care about that, why wouldn't you take the portability? But of course, that's my opinion. That's just me. I do look forward to any of the games coming out on the Switch and the other systems because it's fun to compare a system that is using a much lower power processor, something that is going to be looked at by everyone going forward with these ARM Tegra chips because they're interesting and because they provide a lower energy footprint. And they're doing the same thing that the PS4 and the Xbox One are with some of these games with a fraction of the power. So it's very interesting to look at. But let me know what you guys think down below. Feel free to speculate down there, guys, in the comments. I'm curious what you think is coming, and it has to be announced at E3 if there's anything big, I assume. So let me know what you guys think if any of those games are coming over, or maybe there's one I missed that is on Unreal Engine 4. And you can let me know down below, guys. That's it for now. I will see you next time.